Hi, welcome back. Ready for a couple more chapters? My name is Jill. If you're new here, welcome back to all my subscribers and people that are following along to hear the entire story of my book called Freewill. The link to the book is down below here, and also there are links to the previous videos if you want to catch up and start from the beginning. I highly recommend don't miss the preface of the book. It kind of lays the groundwork for the whole story. Um, so we are on chapter 8, and these are some pretty short chapters, so I think we're gonna get through probably at least 3 chapters today. We'll see how it goes. Thank you again for coming back and joining me. Okay. We finished up with my dad telling us my parents were divorcing for good. So that's where we are right now. We didn't stay in Canoga Park very long. Well, I should say my mom and we kids didn't. My dad bought a different condo in the same complex that he eventually shared with Mary Ann. Mom and we kids moved back to Monrovia. I went to Clifton Middle School for the rest of my 6th grade. I was not in a great place. I had just realized my parents were really getting a divorce. I felt fearful and anxious all the time. I didn't feel welcome at church meetings, even though I was required to go. My dad had now permanently chosen to leave the family and leave the church, but that didn't mean we did. My mom felt ever more determined to stay strong in her faith and keep us children in it too. I know that was based on her heartfelt belief that it was for everyone's best interest. So as awkward as it felt, we kept faithful in our religious duties. 6th grade that year was a blur. I was in complete shock that my family was no longer intact. I had been a good student, usually brought home A's and B's. Now my grades plummeted. I was extremely fearful all the time. I hated going to school for fear that my mom wouldn't be at home when I returned. My grandpa gave me a cool navy baseball cap, and I took to wearing it every day. I guess it kind of became one of my security blankets. I remember one of the first days back at in Monrovia attending Clifton Middle School. I was in English class. I loved English so much. Creative writing was my favorite. But anxiety had gotten the better of me that morning. The teacher must have noticed that I had zoned out and came over to ask me why I wasn't concentrating. I didn't know what to tell her. I couldn't say that my daddy was gone, or that I was afraid of what was happening in my life, or that I didn't feel welcome or wanted at church anymore, or that my mom was crying all the time. I just shrugged my shoulders. She reprimanded me rather harshly. My eyes stung as I stared down at the lined paper. Tears slowly dotted my nearly blank page of a story that never got written. My mom seemed sad most of the time. When one night she got a chance to go to Disneyland with some friends, I felt happy for her. She had gotten home really late. I was so happy when she told me she brought me a souvenir. It was a 1-inch square, clear, hard plastic Minnie Mouse keychain. I kept it with me at all times. I felt as long as I had that keychain, I was connected to Mom. That sounds quite ridiculous now, but I cannot quite explain why or how intensely I felt fear of losing her. I guess because I felt my dad had slipped away, my 11-year-old brain was convinced it could happen to her too. Chapter 9. I feel like this is a therapy session. Let's go on to chapter 9. I wasn't quite used to being a kid in a divorced family. I was just getting used to the fact that we would spend every other Saturday with Dad. One Saturday, for the first time, he brought us to his condo. Marianne was there. This was some weird shit. Marianne used to come over to our family's house with her husband, John. I always liked her, but now I thought she was the person who'd stolen my dad away. I was so mixed up on how to feel upon seeing her. She stood on the stairs of their modernly decorated condo in a purple velvet robe. Her face was warm and familiar, but I felt hurt at the same time. We didn't spend too much time there that day. We went horseback riding in Griffith Park, just Sandy and Dad and I. I didn't have fun though. I was nervous on the horse. My horse got spooked, probably from my nervousness, and took off way away from the others. Really took off from trot to full run. They had to send someone out to help me get the horse under control and help me get back with my dad. I had to work at getting over my fear of horses ever since that day. My dad dropped us off that afternoon. I felt sad to say goodbye, but I was happy to be home with Mom again. When Mom asked what we did, I explained the horseback riding. She said, "You were gone for so long. Where else did you guys go?" We told her we went to Dad's house. One of us mentioned that Marianne was there. "Your father is a pig," was Mom's response. I remember thinking how Mom tried very hard not to badmouth Dad. She tried to keep her bitterness to herself, but in this moment, I knew that I was never to say nice things about Dad, that I was never even to utter Marianne's name in front of Mom, for fear of hurting her. We 4 kids learned very artfully to avoid mentioning anything about Marianne or anything fun that happened at Dad's house on the weekend. I remembered then, in those weeks and months after the divorce, getting up in the night, upset from a nightmare, and wanting Mom to tell me it was okay, only to find Mom in the living room on the couch in the dark, crying. The poor thing was heartbroken at having the love of her life leave her to live with her best friend. I can only imagine that pain, not to mention the fear of taking on raising 4 kids on your own. I wanted to comfort her. I was so sad for her. I felt a strong need to protect her and never, ever do anything to hurt her. Eventually, every other weekend at Dad's became the norm. My dad was so important to me as I was growing up. I looked up to him in the most adoring yet subordinate way. When he left our home when I was 11, he became elusive. Our visits were short and few. Every word he spoke seemed so critically important to me, as I would only see him for a few short hours every other weekend. I, of course, shared those weekends with his new wife, Marianne, now my stepmom, and my 3 siblings. Getting attention from him was tough. I relished every moment I got with him. Dad would pick us up on Friday night. It was a fun, festive feeling that day, knowing I would not have to go out door-to-door preaching on Saturday. And hopefully, if I was lucky, we'd get home too late and I would miss the Sunday meeting too. The alienation I felt at church was combining with my coming of age. I began to appreciate getting out of any religious activity. Sandy and my brothers and I would pile into the backseat of Dad's enormous car. He always greeted us with a hug and a kiss. He would drive for an hour or more with Friday night traffic to Encino, and we'd pick up Marianne where she worked. Then we'd go out to dinner. We had a favorite spaghetti place in Canoga Park, or we'd go to Sierra's for Mexican, or sometimes we'd head out to Sagebrush Cantina in Calabasas. It was a fun place. Dad and Marianne were a young hip couple, and they seemed to know a lot of people in the restaurants, the staff, and the patrons. We would often see famous people there, like network news anchors or actors or musicians. After some time, Dad and Mary Ann moved from the condo in Canoga Park to a house in Santa Susana Canyon near Simi Valley. I slept on the couch in their house, at their house in the canyon, with a big, thick, furry blanket to comfort me, keep me warm, and to cover my head to block out any fears. Saturday morning would start with sleeping in, waking up gently to the sound of some new music from the turntable, softly floating on the air, and the smell of coffee and toast and faintly marijuana. Most Saturdays, Dad would slip away, head to the racquetball club or work or somewhere else mysterious. We hung out at the house, rode Mary Ann's horse, and often took the motorcycles out for the afternoon. Saturday night, we might barbecue. Sometimes we were allowed to have a drink. We would have a $6 million man, as we named the concoction of 7-Up with a splash of Manischewitz blackberry wine. We stayed up late. I would get my cozy blanket and a couple of frozen mini Snickers and curl up on the couch to watch Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, and John Belushi and the rest on Saturday Night Live. I remember so clear every time Dad would come and lay on the couch with me. His familiar voice felt like home in this place that wasn't my home. He would talk so sweet to me and touch my hair. I don't remember the words he said, but in those few moments, I would once again feel like his special little girl. I would feel like I mattered to him. Okay, let's go for one more chapter because this one takes a big turn. And we're getting used to divorce and visiting Dad on the weekend. And now we have a new development at the house. Chapter 10. Not long after Mom and us kids moved back to our hometown, I'm not sure if it was weeks or months, Mom called us kids together for an announcement. Bewildered, I listened with anticipation. Mom said that she had met someone and that she had become very close to him. She said that she was going to be married the following week. About an hour later, this man and his 2 children came to our house. My sister seemed quite happy and anxious to meet this person who was to be our stepdad. I was not anxious. I was scared of the stranger who would be moving into our home. But I pretended to be excited and happy. The whole thing was beyond unexpected. It was downright bizarre. My mom had always been this extremely strict JW. Marrying a non-believer was a huge no-no in the church. You wouldn't necessarily get disfellowship for it, but a major reprimanding and following guilt trip would ensue. But now, as an adult looking back, I can imagine what she'd been going through and how easily she could have been swept away with what seemed to her someone to love her and to help her manage raising 4 kids. After all, she had married Dad at 17 and had never been on her own. She was crushed by what had transpired. As crazy as it seemed at the time, I get it now. A week later, I had a stepdad and a stepbrother that moved into our home, and a stepsister who moved into me and Sandy's room. My new stepsister, Cindy, was my age, but immediately she seemed to hit it off with Sandy more than me. They seemed to have more in common. I was feeling very much a third wheel. I was still quite shy, quiet, and young for my age. My stepdad was all smiles and nice and friendly at first, although it was extremely disconcerting that he installed a gun cabinet in our dining room, which was right outside my bedroom door. It was loaded with rifles and ammo. My extremely religious family had never owned a gun. Heck, my brothers got in trouble for biting off the corner of their toast and holding it like a pistol. Pew, pew. So seeing that monstrosity every time I walked out of my room was disturbing. That cabinet was not a danger, but it did represent the kind of negativity and violence that became the norm in my house. My stepdad slowly began to show his true personality. He was demanding, "Don't leave your shoes lying anywhere." He'd scream at you. "Leave a bike in the driveway" was asking for a shitstorm of yelling. Messes in the house seemed to be one of his main agitations. These lectures were daunting, as he was a formidable, intimidating brute. Any little infraction of neatness or otherwise was blown up to huge proportions. One day, not long after they'd moved in, he got very angry at his son for something. I watched in horror as he threw his 9-year-old across the room and then proceeded to kick him and yell at him. Believe me, once you witness something like that, every time that man raised his voice, it scared the shit out of you. I would scatter to my room like a mouse to a hole in the wall, or jump on my bike and ride around until I thought everything had calmed down. I learned how to stay under the radar. I was a pretty good kid. My parents had always been pretty strict. I had learned from an early age to be obedient and respectful, but there was just no pleasing my stepdad. He was always pissed about something. My mom would kind of explain away his tirades, but eventually even she seemed to be frightened by the man. The environment in my home evolved from being a calm, quiet sanctuary into a chaotic landmine in which detonators were everywhere. You had to watch where you stepped. My stepsister Cindy seemed to take it in stride. I suppose she was pretty used to it. She took more of a cavalier approach when he'd go off. She'd roll her eyes and say something quietly rebellious when we were in our room. Her attitude made me a little less frightened of him and comforted me in a way. In time, Sandy decided that she wanted to live with my dad. I couldn't really blame her. Stepdad was a bully that raged about something, or should I say, many things daily. But in moving to Dad's house, Sandy was also leaving the religion and leaving my mom. My mom was devastated. The scene in the house that night was dramatic. Mom begged and cried for Sandy not to go. Since stepdad did not like seeing Mom upset, he went apeshit on Sandy. She was maybe 12 or 13 years old. My dad was on the front porch waiting to pick her up. Stepdad burst open our bedroom door, threw a heavy, rigid suitcase across the room and looked at Sandy and shouted, "Pack your bags, bitch." She did. Now my big sister was gone. I can remember thinking, I understand why Sandy wanted to go, but it scared me. Being raised as a Jehovah's Witness, fear of displeasing God was intense. I was already afraid my dad was going to die at Armageddon, and now I was scared for my sister. I was taught to believe and be faithful to get the reward of everlasting life in paradise, and that not being faithful meant death. So I may have even envied Sandy's brave choice to leave, but I would have been terrified to even entertain the idea. Yet. Okay, so that wraps up chapter 10, and so we have totally new characters, some good, some challenging, and really mixed up time, because all this time Mom was holding fast to the faith. Even though she married a worldly man, she insisted on staying a strong witness. So went to meetings, kind of had to find a balance between living with 3 now what we called worldly people in our home with guns and violence and everything else, and go to meetings and listen to all of that, and then go to my dad's house on the weekend. I was getting a lot of mixed messages and wasn't really sure about what to do. So I hope you enjoyed today's chapters. I hope you subscribe if you haven't yet, and I hope you come back for more. And I so appreciate you listening. Thank you so much. Take care.